Hello and welcome to today's webinar. Blockchain is coming to an organization near you. Is yours next? I'm Teresa Resick, the Director of Webinars here at AIIM, and AIIM is your host and producer of today's event. And with me today are Alan Pell-Sharp of Deep Analysis and Martin Bunder of Spherion. Spherion is the underwriter of today's webinar, and we thank them for their support. And we thank you for taking the time to join us today. And just as we get started, just want to offer a few pointers for you to view the webinar. By joining live, you can customize your own viewing experience, so feel free to open, close, or resize the different windows. And across the bottom of your screen is a list of all of the widgets that we have available to you. And Group Chat is one of those widgets available, and you just open that by clicking on the icon that is along the bottom. And with Group Chat, you will be able to text chat with each other and also with a few of us here at AIIM. Do ask questions of the speakers throughout our time today using the Q&A feature. We will hold them until the end, where we should have about 5 or 10 minutes to answer them. But you can also use this feature to ask for any technical assistance. You may download a PDF of the presentation at any time. Just look to the resources list. And there are also a few other documents and links in there to help you learn more about today's topic. Just click in there at any time, and that resource will open in a new browser tab, and you can save that and read it after the webinar. And at the end of this webinar, a brief survey will open in your browser, and it is also in the widgets below the slide area. And I would appreciate it if you would take a few moments to offer your feedback, because I really do value what you have to say. And this webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted to AIIM.org's Resources Webinars page in just a few days. Now I want to introduce the speakers we have with us today. And first I'd like to introduce Martin Bunder. And Martin is the co-founder and product owner of Spherion. And Spherion provides an API-driven platform for document processing and blockchain. And they provide easy-to-use solutions to bridge the gap between today's world of the very often document-centric business processes with blockchain. Additionally, they offer standard add-ins that allow no-code or low-code integrations of Spherion's software with your own applications. Then also, Alan Pell-Sharp is the founder and principal analyst of Deep Analysis. And Alan has over 25 years of experience in the IT world, working with a wide variety of end-user organizations and suppliers around the world. Alan was formerly a partner at the Real Story Group, consulting director at Indian services firm Wipro, and the vice president for North America at the industry analyst firm Ovum. And he is regularly quoted in the press, including the Wall Street Journal and The Guardian, and has appeared on BBC, CNBC, and ABC as an expert guest. And also, Alan is the author of AIIM's training materials that we do have on emerging technologies that does cover blockchain in depth. And right now, this is normally where I would turn things over to Alan, but through the joys of air travel and a changed flight today, he's actually not able to join us live. And this morning, he very graciously recorded what his presentation was going to be. So if you bear with me just a moment, I am going to turn on this video so that we still can hear Alan share with us what he has to say about blockchain.
Well, hi there. This is Alan Pell-Sharp from Deep Analysis. And Deep Analysis is an industry analyst firm that looks at blockchain, AI, machine learning, basically the emerging technologies that impact the world of information management. And today I'm going to talk about blockchain and try and demystify it a little bit, put it into practical terms. I'm sure it's something you've heard a lot about in the industry press and just the general media, frankly. Blockchain's a hot topic. But why is it a hot topic? Is it of any relevance to you? So my hope today is to step you through this in a hopefully understandable and clear way. Explains, if you like, the business problems, how those business problems are addressed by blockchain, and at a sort of a practical level, explain how it works. We're not going to get into deep technology here. We're not going to be talking about hashes and how a peer-to-peer network actually functions. We're going to keep this very, very practical and business-like. And so with that, let's jump into this. So why all the interest in blockchain? If you pick up a newspaper, read any of the tech industry news today, you'll be hearing the word blockchain left, right, and center. Well, the bottom line is that blockchain is, on the one level, technically very complicated. On the other level, it's a surprisingly simple concept to get your head around. And what it does is it really meets the challenges, if you like, of many business pain points today. One of the biggest things we have today is the lack of traceability. Something goes from one place to another, we don't know where it's gone. So that could be a legal document, it could be a contract, it could be almost anything. But, we're reliant today on email, telephone calls, and we really want something better than that. We want to know in real time where something is and what's happened to it. So we want to be able to monitor events. We want to be able to add metadata. We want to be able to know exactly what's happened and what is happening. And why do we want to do that? Well, sometimes just for a clean business process to operate, but sometimes because we have to be compliant with either our own internal regulations, if you want to call them that, or external regulations. And those, of course, have come into the news recently at a very high level with GDPR in Europe, and we have a similar one here now in the States, in California. And the likelihood is there's going to be more and more of these regulations coming along, not just for privacy, but for accountability, right? So meeting standards and controls. We want to meet regulatory compliance conditions. We just want to do that automatically. We don't want to have a lot of fuss about it. We also want the ability to be flexible. So things change over time, and we want to be able to ensure that if things change, again, we remain accountable, we remain compliant. Nothing stays the same forever. And ultimately, we do want to apply proper governance, stakeholder management, if we want to call it that, as we do here, and reduce risk. I know these are all fairly basic business pain points that you're all familiar with. And as of today, just to meet these basic requirements, we have to do an awful lot of different things. Many of them manual, many of them questionable, and in many cases, our version of the truth is not necessarily a shared version of the truth, because just because I said this happened doesn't mean that that's going to be acceptable to somebody else. And so this is where blockchain technology can potentially step in to help us with these, basic business pain points. A blockchain is basically a shared database, but it's an immutable shared database. And what that means is it cannot be changed. Everything is recorded, everything is permanent, and everybody has a shared version of the truth. And that gives us auditability. So a blockchain provides a full audit trail of data, and it is a permanent record. And again, to be clear about this, potentially Martin will go into this in a little bit more detail as we move on, but it cannot be changed. So that takes us to this immutability bit. It's a new term for many people, but basically we're introducing tamper-proof data. Now, we've had write once only databases in the past, but they again were your version of the truth, and in theory, if not practice, things could be tampered with potentially. But in a shared distributed database, a blockchain driven database, things really cannot change. So we have a single source of truth, a single source of data integrity. And for many, that is it. That's the value of blockchain. So if you think about records keeping, for example, that is just wonderful. That checks off an awful lot of boxes and makes life easy for people. But that's typically the start for many others. If we take blockchain forward and we move it into a true business process, and this is where blockchain can really come to life, we start talking about the term here, smart contracts. Now, a smart contract essentially does the same thing as a traditional contract. And if you really think about it, a contract is quite simply a series of promises, and a series of promises that if this situation occurs, if these requirements are met, then I will pay you, or I will deliver this, or whatever. That is a contract, right? A series of promises, and those promises are actionable based upon specific requirements and conditions. Well, smart contracts do the same thing, but they're essentially automated, right? So we construct smart contracts. Now, they can actually replace paperwork today, in a sense. If a delivery arrives at a certain point, and we know that for sure, then that automatically triggers the next step of a process. Whereas today, you would have to have somebody sign off the delivery note and then scan it and send it and do whatever. So in many cases, we see a sort of hybrid situation of electronic documents. But in theory, at least, you can fully automate the steps. So as we say here, continuous real-time tracking of data is facilitated through the use of smart contracts across the supply chain. So think delivery notes, think purchase orders, think invoices. If these requirements are met, then that or this then happens. So with the immutability of a shared database, the blockchain, we can then start adding a layer of sophistication onto that, a layer of sophistication which has immense value in the broader business world. The most obvious one, and we do say here supply chain, because it is the most obvious. In the world of supply chain, depending on where you're focused, be that the delivery of food, be that the delivery of containers on trucks or ships or whatever, the biggest single expense is often paperwork. Just the management of that paperwork of all the goods across the supply chain. So we have the potential today, and by the way, many people are working on this. I mean, this is huge. There's a lot of investment. It's not an if, it's a will happen at some point. We can automate so much of that. So enormous efficiency gains, wonderful increases in margins, and just much more accuracy, frankly. And so if you think about it that way, and you think about how a supply chain might work in the future, you're basically at a point where you can disintermediate, you can really bring about true digital transformation. Now, that term digital transformation is much overused. I personally loathe it. But what it tends to trigger off in people's minds is the idea of a large consultancy firm coming in, tens of millions of dollars or whatever, and many years of business process reorganization. Well, there might still be some of that in truth as we move forward. Businesses do need to be studied. Change does need to be managed carefully. But the fascinating thing with blockchain is you can really leapfrog in many ways. You can do a really pretty enormous transformation very, very quickly. Because just to be clear here, you won't be building your own blockchain, right? The technology is out there already for you to plug into and use. So the wonderful thing is here that your legacy systems, now be that an ECM system or a CRM system or an accounting system or whatever, potentially can just simply plug in to a secure and private blockchain. And the work really involved is ensuring that the other people involved in your transactions, involved in your processes, are also plugged in. So we're not saying this is a minor amount of work. We're not saying this is going to happen overnight. But the potential for true disintermediation, radical change, and fast radical change is really possible, and hence so much of the excitement. So let's summarize this, right? So the business problem is traceability, right? We want to be able to monitor events, and we really want to have all of the data associated with a product or a service or an activity, traceable. Well, with a blockchain, you do get, by default, a full, extremely detailed, granular audit trail of all the data, everything that ever happened to it. And that's just a default setting, if you want to call it that, in any kind of blockchain situation. So you're given automatically an everlasting, permanent sort of record-keeping function across your supply chain. And I keep using this term supply chain, but think about a legal matter. Various legal offices are involved with it, maybe even external offices being the justice system. We can consider that as a supply chain as well, because ultimately data, documents, items will pass hands, and everybody needs to be sure that everything is secure and everything is traceable. And to that security thing, we also rope in sort of compliance, right? So things need to be done in a compliant and standard way to make sure that, and nobody's cheating the books and nobody's doing the wrong thing here. So standards and controls are obviously critical in any organization today. But with a blockchain, we have immutability, right? We have time-stamped, tamper-proof data. That isn't going to stop bad people doing bad things. But today we're going to have an absolutely irrefutable record of what they did, when they did it, and how they did it. So there's no getting away from the truth. Now, those two things together, which sort of provide strict controls, ironically maybe, or conversely, depending on which semantics you want to use here, provide you with flexibility, right? You can adapt to rapidly changing events. You can run various scenarios. You can do an awful lot of things here and know that you're secure and you're compliant. And really, a lot of that flexibility comes through the use of smart contracts. So I think in the future, when we start talking about blockchain in almost any context in a business, we'll really be thinking about smart contracts. The blockchain is really a sort of a back-end record-keeping system, a brilliant one at that. But the real beauty of the blockchain is the use of smart contracts. So real-time tracking of data, against predefined rules in the contract. So we're really going to have a time here where we've been talking about the paperless office forever, right? We're getting to a point where that's really is genuinely feasible. There's so much data out there today. Now, that can be data generated by somebody opening a document and changing it, or it could be data from the Internet of Things. It can be data from anywhere, but as long as we've got good data here, we can track activities and we can execute contracts against that data in the knowledge that it's accurate, it's true, it's trusted, and it's unchangeable. And that takes us to sort of the stakeholder management thing, which is, we want to, we've got governance and we've got flexibility, we've got the ability to sort of execute contracts and business, but we really want to do that at the lowest risk possible. And we want to ensure that everybody is on board and everybody's trusted. So again, with blockchain, you sort of get that as standard. And that really does open the door for true disintermediation. And I think this is the exciting thing with blockchain. Again, these projects won't happen in 5 minutes. They take time. There's work involved. But blockchain, by enabling a peer-to-peer interactional situation where everything is trusted, everything is recorded, everything is trusted, you can really start thinking outside the box. We could see the future of digital signatures being disrupted, for example. But I think much more than that, we are going to see almost any business situation where more than one party is involved. So that could be your supplier, that could be a channel partner, that could be a client that you're selling to. You're all involved at some level in a peer-to-peer locked network where you can start rethinking the way you do business. You can start rethinking and ultimately transforming and disintermediating the way you work today. And so with that, I'll hand over now to Martin at Spherion.
Okay, thank you, Alan. Well, brief introduction of myself, already introduced by Theresa and by Alan. My name is Martin Boender. I've been the co-founder of and product owner, product manager for Spherion. Well, Spherion, I won't talk about it a lot in this presentation, but very briefly. Spherion started in 2015, focusing on business process management and in combination of blockchain. And we have been around for not so long, but it's also a very new field. Therefore, we always feel like old hands. We've had some very good use cases and already put different blockchain applications in production in different environments, federal government agencies, municipalities, in education, in financial services, and in healthcare. And what I want to do today is to take some of these applications that we have implemented in use cases and present them to you to give you more of an idea of the things that you can do with blockchain today in real-life production environments. So not an advanced technology cases, but basically simple projects that you can start out with and that can already add an enormous value to your processes and to your applications and to your companies. But before I start into that, I do want to start with a few basic things. First of all, we focus on blockchain in enterprise content management, in document processing, in business process management. And why? Because we think that it can bring an enormous value to your company and to your organization already today. Because what blockchain allows you to do is to add proof of authenticity and proof of existence to all the content that you capture in your organization, whether it's scanning or through email or through upload of documents, information that you store, data and documents that you store, documents that you create or that you share with other stakeholders, customers, suppliers, documents that you process to your workflows and to your case management systems, documents or data that you distribute to other stakeholders or third parties or to your customers, or things that you archive or put into a record management system for compliance reasons. All that kind of information, you will be able to add proof of authenticity and existence to that kind of data and documents. Now, how does that work in a very high level? Like Alan said, we're not going to go into the bits of bytes, but to just give you a good idea, a high-level idea on how that would work, is that if you have any content, be it data or be it documents, you're able to use standard, what they call hashing algorithms, public algorithms that will basically take the content, take the data, and create like an electronic fingerprint, a fixed value, a fixed string of data representing the original content. So a hashing algorithm basically puts it to an algorithm that will result in an electronic fingerprint. And if anything changes in the data or in the content, and you hash it again, it will result in a different electronic fingerprint. So if only a space or a punctuation or a letter changes, it results in a different hash, a different electronic fingerprint. Now we take this hash, and only this hash, and we put it into a blockchain record. We sign it, we digitally sign it using a public-private key combination, and we sign the transaction on blockchain. So we anchor the information on blockchain. So it's very important to understand that the document or the data itself will not be written to a blockchain. Yes, you can do that. Whether or not that's smart depends on the type of data you want to publish. If it's private information, don't write it to a blockchain. But your data and documents will be safe in your own systems, in your own content management system, your own document management system, and only the electronic fingerprint will be stored on the blockchain. And that electronic fingerprint has no relation to the original data. So it's not like an encryption that you can decrypt and come back to the original information. It's just a fingerprint. It doesn't result in any way or can be traced anyway to the original data. And we write that anchor on the blockchain. Now, and on the other side, then, if you want to verify the authenticity or the content of a document, you basically rehash the original content. So if you share a document with a third party, you send them a PDF or a Word document or an AutoCAD drawing, that person can rehash, recreate the electronic fingerprint, and then verify it on the blockchain to see if it's still authentic. Because if the hash is the same, it means that the original file is the same, and therefore you can guarantee authenticity of the data or the document. Now, how did we come about that? Well, already back in 2015, blockchain was on our radar, and we came across a first use case. A customer of ours, an environmental planning agency that had a case management system. And this organization is a federal government agency that will analyze and decide whether or not to grant a building permission for large projects. So if there's a new plant needs to be built, or a city needs to be extended, or those kind of projects, there needs to be all kinds of building permissions granted, taking in respect the environmental impact or the structural impact on the landscape or things like that. And they have all kinds of rules and regulations that they need to follow. Now, as part of that, whether a permit, whether or not gets granted and issued, they have a record management system in place, which is needed for the regulatory compliance. So the way that works is that we take they asked us for the record management, to take the original files that they have collected and convert them to PDF. And then they asked us, okay, can you use a traditional digital signature to sign the PDFs and to make sure that at a later stage we can prove the authenticity of the document by showing the signed document as being the copy that we archived. So we said, okay, well, maybe blockchain is a good alternative for that. And we said, okay, let's take a hash of those PDFs, register them on blockchain, and then at a later stage, you can recreate the hash from the PDF and show that the document has unchanged and therefore is authentic. But on top of that, you can take the original file, like if you have an AutoCAD drawing or you have an Excel sheet or other calculation files. If you convert them to PDF, of course, you lose all kinds of information, important information that's not in the PDF. So let's also take the original file, the Excel file or the AutoCAD drawing, and take a hash of that and write that hash also to the blockchain. And do that of the two files together. So take the two files, create one hash of both of them, one fingerprint of both of those files, and you can prove at a later stage that those two files belong together and are hashed and stored at the same time. And you can prove by taking the original file and the PDF that they belong together and that they're authentic and that they have not been changed. In fact, take the whole dossier of all the files that you have collected during your workflow process and hash those. Create one hash of the whole dossier, the whole file set. Then you can prove that nothing is missing, nothing has been tampered with, and all was stored at a certain date and time, because you also have a timestamp of when the hashing was done and written to the blockchain. So now they were able to prove from a regulatory point of view that all their files were authentic, not tampered with, nothing has been left out, the file is complete, the dossier is complete. So the next step that we said, okay, why don't we start at the end? Let's start at the beginning, at the moment of submission. As soon as the customer uploads the data, inputs some data in some fields and submits that to your system, already at that time, create a hash of that information, of those attachments, of those files that are submitted. So at a later stage, you can exactly prove at what date the submission was done and at what time the was sent in, and that nothing has changed, that was in fact the data that you received at that time. So at a later stage, any discussion starts that, oh, this is not the data that we've submitted, this is not the information that we send in, or we send it in earlier. No, you can prove beyond any doubt that this is the data and the documents that you received with the original application. Because what happens on a regular basis is that the process is denied, that the permit is denied, because there's some missing information. And they did request with an email some additional information to be submitted that was missing at the first submission. And then people, if they don't do it, and at a later stage, therefore the application is denied, then you can prove that you did ask for additional information at a certain time. Or when the ruling is negative, the people have a right to appeal that decision. But the appeal has to happen within 6 weeks of the denial. So by registering the important steps in the workflow, we are able at that stage to prove that when the ruling was done, when that was submitted to the original applicant, and that they didn't or did within 6 weeks launch an appeal and register an appeal. And even when it goes to court cases, because we're often talking about million-dollar projects, and they tend to not take the negative decision lying down, now in court they're able to prove beyond any doubt that the process was done as it's supposed to do, that data was missing or data was complete, but there were some other regulations which were not adhered to. So they're able to have a transparent audit trail, because this customer uses an audit trail within their own systems, and that's very reliable, but still it is the audit trail of this agency. And with the lack of trust in today's digital world, basically they're able to create trust by having a publicly viewable, independently verifiable audit trail of the process and of the steps they've taken in the process of this permissions. A more recent use case we implemented was for a financial services company. Financial services company uses multiple systems and international systems, international company, in which there were many steps where their KYC processes were done and the loan application processes was done. First install it when you buy a car, you know it, you want to lease it. The sales agent already starts checking, do you have a copy of your driver's license or your passport? Do you have a statement of work, of your employment, or a bank account, proof of bank account? These kind of data are being requested by the sales clerk, but they're again checked again by the front office. And then down the line in the business line, they're checked again, and then again in the back office. And every time people start checking, is the application complete? Is there an ID? Is the ID reliable? Is the quality okay? Is everything missing? Is all the checks and balances are redone and redone? And in this case, for this company, it would take up to 6 weeks before a loan was approved and passed all of the checks back into the home office, the back office of the company, the headquarters of the company. And of course, that's a long time in any process. So what we said is, okay, what if we now take the first step and already when the sales clerk does all the checking, register the original file and make a hash of it, make a hash that this employee did that check on a certain date, and then do the same thing for the whole application. So that allows us at this time to automatically do the next checks. So if the next steps, they are automated in their workflow, where they basically check, are the hashes still okay? Then in that case, we can skip the step because we can trust the original verification. And we can immediately go to the back office and issue the loan if it fits all the check boxes of the approval process. What they also do is that they bundle these loans together and sell them on to an institutional investor. And in the past, the institutional investor would also do the same checks, would also do the same data room checks to verify that all the loans in the package are the same. And this can also be now highly automated by showing that all the applications are unchanged and are validated and are valid, and they can trust that information, which allows them to take a much lower rate and offer a much better deal to the lease company, to the financial service company. Now, another use case to briefly display is that the clinical trials, also very document intensive. They have trial data, they have documents, and they need to share it with all the stakeholders. So that takes an enormous amount of information that they need to share, and you need to trust, because there are many companies involved, as you can see, or are familiar with, that are in that system, and they all need to be trusting each other and to trust the data that is out there. And by using blockchain in combination with this document management system, we are able to prove that the data and the documents are all authentic and have not been tampered with. Digital signatures already mentioned by Alan. Avionics manufacturing has product change requests from the airline or the airline builder, and they need to collaborate on that in order to make sure that those changes can be applied. Now, at this stage, it's also back and forth through email and at the end, trusting each other. But as you can understand, an error in manufacturing can lead to enormous claims in case of accidents and things like that. So for compliance and for protection, they now use the workflow in combination with blockchain, which allows them to have the digital signatures not only on the PDFs, because digital signatures in the traditional way are limited to PDFs only, but also the original drawings, the original requests, the original stress calculations and things like that are now signed as an electronic file, by basically taking the digital object, creating a hash, and writing the hash to a blockchain, which allows them to prove that this was actually the original specification of the part, the original specification of the drawing, the original stress calculation. So that is an enormous value for them. So very briefly to say, why do you need blockchain? You need blockchain to provide a trust in a digital world by allowing you to sign the content, anchor your process, and making them independently verifiable. And that adds absolute value to any company today. So in those presentations, the use cases that we've implemented, we had several things that we learned. First of all, what do you need blockchain for? Why not a normal database? That's an important question to answer. If there's trust, I'm not going to go to all of the details, but we have documentation online and places that we have published on LinkedIn where you can see where you would need the normal database. But if you share information with other people, externally or internally, and there is an issue of trust, then blockchain is certainly something you can take a look at. Something is also important, start with simple solutions. Don't start with very advanced, like Alan mentioned, the smart contracts. I strongly believe that smart contracts are not quite ready yet. Also an important lesson, stay blockchain agnostic, which would mean there's many different blockchain solutions out there. You maybe have heard of Ethereum, of Hyperledger, of Factum as a great blockchain, allowing you to anchor data. There are many different blockchains, but look at the use case to implement the use case. But since it's a technology that is very rapidly developing, don't pin yourself to one specific blockchain, but definitely look for that possibility to switch in a later stage. And how would you start with some next steps? For instance, to start with a simple solution. You can start with it now. Just pick any document that you receive and that you feel, okay, it's very handy, very valuable for us to prove which date and which data we received at a certain moment. Or take the document that you send out, any statement that you send out, or any files that you share with other people, you say, okay, it would be valuable to prove the authenticity for that. You can prove easily what you shared when you shared something with a third party, with a customer, or with a stakeholder. You can play with it for free. The links that you're showing here, they are also displayed in the recap of the presentation. And you can find them on our website. This will allow you to start for free to play with these documents. You can upload a document, any type of document, sign it on a blockchain, and verify it at a later stage. So that's, for me, at the moment the things that I wanted to share with you. You can look us up on the website. You can find the information that we provide to have like an API gateway or plugins to your ECM and BPM systems, to your scanning systems, to COFAX or other systems, to blockchains. So I'll be happy to take some questions and hope to be able to provide some answers for you.
Well, thank you. We've been listening to Martin Bunder of Spherion, and we do have a lot of questions that have come in, so I'm just going to try to get to as many of these as we can. And one thing just to reiterate, when Martin said that to play with this for free, it is in the resources section on your screen right now. So both of those links are there, as well as a couple others that we have that I also thought were helpful on Spherion's website. So do check those out. And so one of the questions here, Martin, let me direct this one to you. Sorry, it was over here in the group chat. Sorry, I have too many windows open at the moment here. Someone is asking that by not writing the file to the blockchain itself, but just having this connection to it, does it matter if that content or records management system, if it is cloud-based or on-prem?
Yeah, good question, because it's a very important topic. You often have lots of sensitive data or private data in your systems that you do not want to share with third parties. You do not want to share publicly in the cloud. And that is what blockchain is allowing you to do. The content, your documents, your data will stay safely behind your firewall, whether it's in the cloud, whether it's on-premise. You keep your data where it is today, and only you decide which data you share with whom. But the registration, the electronic fingerprint, it's safe to put that, for instance, on a Factum blockchain, which is public and which can be seen by anybody. But from the electronic fingerprint, they cannot derive any information. So your own private information will stay safe within your organization unless you decide to share it with a customer or a supplier. And then they can verify that's an authentic file.
You've had a lot of emphasis in talking about the security of all of this. And someone's asking that, what is the likelihood that a year from now that someone's going to be able to break this type of a chain or be able to interrupt it in some way? I mean, how can we affirm the security with this authenticity?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question also, because there's private blockchain solutions and there's public blockchain solutions. The private blockchain solutions, or sometimes called permission blockchain solutions, are being used within a company or within a consortium of companies. They typically have either a few nodes or several tens or hundreds of nodes. And potentially, if you were to go into quantum computing, there is a possibility that 50% of those systems can be hacked and change records in that system within the same second of time. In order to fool the system, to tamper with the system, you will need a majority, so more than 50% of all of the nodes, to be changed at the same time, the exact same time, the exact same second in time. And this is with today's computing impossible. And also, even in the future with quantum computing, if you're talking about 100 or a few hundred nodes, it will be impossible to do. Besides maybe being very expensive to do so, because each of those transactions will cost a little money, and you would have to pay, even with quantum computer, those systems to accept your transaction. Now, if you look at public blockchains, like the blockchain which is used by Bitcoin, or like the blockchain which is used by Factum, there are so many nodes around that to get 50% of that, or more than 50% of that network, control that network, is practically impossible and also too expensive to do. So that is the key security that we need to be able to guarantee that also in the future these systems cannot be hacked.
someone is asking for the difference between the security of this process versus having a repository site that has like two-factor authentication as well as like the HIPAA security plan for having that kind of security put into place with two-factor authentication. How is blockchain even more secure than that?
Well, with the Dropbox example, you would allow people to access your system. You would allow certain users to access your data, whether they're behind a firewall with a two-factor authentication on top of that. That would still be storing your data somewhere publicly. And there is always a possibility that people will hack that, even with two-factor authentication, especially if you then talk about quantum computing, which would be able to hack that second string. So the big difference is that with blockchain, the things that you put onto the public system, that you would put on the accessible system, would only be those hashes. And again, your data will be secure behind your own firewall and not being shared publicly. Only the electronic fingerprint is shared publicly.
One other question I want to try to squeeze in here. I know when I was just noticing for people who were logged on today that we have a number of companies that are systems integrators, the kinds of organizations that help companies implement systems like this. Do you have some sort of a partner program or something like that that could be of help and benefit to systems integrators and companies that are in the channel there to help their clients?
Yeah, definitely. That's our main activity, is to help system integrators and software developers to easily integrate this type of functionality into their systems. And we have a dedicated developer page for software developers, and we have information, IT partnership program where system integrators or other people can contact us and ask us to help them with these use cases, where they can talk to us about the use cases that they have in mind, and we can help them explaining to them what would be good ideas or maybe not so good ideas, and help them with realizing their use cases.
Okay. I just want to mention a couple other things that we have going on at AIIM right now. If you go to AIIM.org and under the events and click on the virtual event, this Thursday we'll be putting on for you a 4-hour event where we have, I want to say, like 10, 11 speakers lined up. And the general topic is on digitalizing the enterprise, and there's a lot of good customer use case stories there. So I invite you to come and sign up for our virtual event and just to get a little bit more knowledge and experience through the people who are going to be joining us on Thursday. And AIIM is also offering a special unlimited training offer where you can get 1 year of access for all of AIIM's online training classes, and this also includes the online CIP prep class, which personally I found invaluable before I took the CIP exam, and you also get 1 year of professional membership. This offer does expire at the end of next week on November 16th. So I encourage you to go to, when you download a PDF of the slides, click on this link, click on this slide, and you'll get the link that'll take you over to that. And just to get more information about the unlimited training. And there's also a link directly to that unlimited training offer in the resources tab that's on your page right now. And since we are getting to the end of our webinar time, I just want to remind everyone that we have recorded the webinar. It's going to be available to listen again in another day or two. Do download the resources. Please take the survey. I greatly value your feedback. And I also want to thank our underwriter, Spherion. Without support from our solution providers, AIIM wouldn't be able to bring you these free educational programs like our webinar. So thank you very much, Spherion, for your sponsorship and contribution. And as we bring this webinar to a close, I do want to leave you with the closing thought of Martin Bunder of Spherion, and just have him share a key takeaway from today. So Martin, your closing thought?
Yes. Thank you a lot, Alan and Teresa. Yeah, just closing that, I would say the technologies around today, it's easy and free to test, and to try some simple use cases is really not difficult or expensive. So I would encourage everybody to at least try to experiment with some simple solutions, and you can very quickly see what the pros and cons are, and how it works, and that it does already bring live use cases and with large value to your organizations. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, everyone. For AIIM, this is Teresa Resick, and we will see you with our next webinar. And have a good afternoon.